Now, you know that I'm a man of few words, right? Okay, everybody's coughing on that one. We can go with that. You ever have somebody drop by for one of those catch-up visits? You know, it's not anything scheduled. Maybe they have one or two things on their mind, and they'll drop by for what ought to be a 5-minute visit. And 45 minutes later, you have traveled the world in the conversation. You know, you start out and you'll talk about things like, let's see, we could talk about kids and grandkids. I'm at that point. You've got to start there. Talk about our spouses. We might talk about deer hunting, the State of the Union. Somewhere in there, sprinkle in a little bit of biblical issues. And then it never fails. We circle back to one of the earlier ones. And it's one of these kinds of conversations. All here, there, and yonder. And 45 minutes later, you finally decide you really need to go. We stepped away from studying 1 John last week. We took a break because there was another topic I really felt like we needed to look at. Today I want to go back and try and wrap that up. John's letter is a lot like those 5-minute catch-up visits that turn into 45 minutes. It's tough to study him one verse, one chapter at a time because he has that circle back practice to the point that sometimes you can think he's actually repeating himself. Preachers do that. John doesn't. When he circles back to a topic, it's because he's got more to share. He's got more he wants to get across about that topic. And when he's writing this letter, it's not just one of those visit between friends kind of letter. It's actually a letter that's addressed to someone, to a group that are very close to this aged apostle. His style, his tone is different from, well, it's not the corrective, mildly chastising tone of Paul to the Corinthians. It's not that formal style of basically the whole letter of the Romans, and it has nothing in common with that come down hard on chastising the Galatian letter. John's letter is much more like that friendly, affectionate, conversational tone. It's gentle, it's reassuring, it's uplifting. He's writing to individuals, to certain groups, certain group that has a special place in his heart. Now, he'll have some stern things to say, but he reserves those stern warnings for a group that he always identifies with third-person plural, they and them. The readers that John writes directly, he reserves that you and you all. He's got a very different view, a very different intent for the ones he's addressing. And so it shouldn't surprise us. I saved this one for last because it really needs to be there. His most common theme. 5 short chapters, he's going to use both noun and verb form, this one word about 50 times. Anybody want to guess what the word is? Agape? Everybody, if you know one Greek word, you know that word, right? Just about any Christian with any beginning level of authority knows agape. It knows that word that we normally translate with the English word love, and yet it is so much greater than that in so many ways. And yet John goes back to that time and time and time again, not just in the use of the words, but in his whole approach and his whole style. We would have to say this is the dominant issue of this short letter. And of course, we've already gone over so many times the difference between the 3 Greek words for love, right? We know the 3 Greek words. One is eros, that's between a husband and wife. Okay, see, I gave you a real easy one. Come on, that's between a husband and... Okay, good. We got at least that one. That's that intense desire that's supposed to be there. You've got philos or Philadelphia, which is brotherly love. It's that affection, companionship kind of thing. And yet only agape is suitable to express the true nature of God. And eros and philos can both involve action, but they don't have to. Agape is strictly, and it's a love of action. We'll have to do it that way. We could even talk about it kind of like a sort of energy. And so I want to go back to that in a minute. But this morning I want us to dig into this last study. And poor Walter, he's basically copied what? Almost half the verses in 1 John, right? He'll never get them all up there. It won't be hard to follow. Because John has so much he wants to get across to those readers in the first century, and I believe to us today, about this critical topic. John's tone is very different from, well, the basic writings of Paul. It's very different from James and pretty different from Peter. John is expressly devoted to conveying this message of love. He shows it by some of the pronouns he uses, the affectionate nicknames he uses. Chapter 2, verse 1, he'll say, "My little children, these things I write to you, that you may not sin." And he's going to use that again. He'll use it in chapter 2, verse 18. He'll use it in chapter 4, verse 4. In chapter 2, verse 7, he drops down and he uses a term we use all the time. I know NIV doesn't say brethren. That's for King James, New King James. But it's talking about brothers and sisters. Chapter 3, he opens that we should be called children of God. Verse 1. These very special terms of endearment, it's like he's talking to, well, maybe his children in the faith. My favorite term, though, is found in verse 2 of chapter 3. Now, Jake, where are you? Did you spell it the way you said you were going to, the title?
I did not.
Oh, we had a good one going. If you've been to any of the traditional wedding ceremonies, you know how they start, right? It's a two-word expression. Dearly beloved. John uses that word twice in the text. Chapter 3, verse 2, and then he uses it again in chapter 4. And he uses a compound word of that where we started, agape. And it literally translates, dearly beloved. And he's using these descriptive terms. It's agapetoi. And he's using these descriptive terms to make vividly apparent just how special a place these readers have in his heart. That's about as strong a term of endearment as he could use. And then you look at the tone of the letter as a whole. In chapter 1, he writes down verses 3 and 4. He tells us, and I didn't give you these verses, he tells us he's writing so that our joy might be full, so that we might have an intimate relationship with the apostles and with their Lord Jesus. And he's writing to reassure about our constant and complete forgiveness that's available in the blood. And how we have an advocate. We have one who will intercede on our behalf when we do stumble. And you move further into the book and he writes in the middle of chapter 2 these words of praise for the victory that's ours. How we've escaped death and moved unto light, and we've overcome the wicked one. And just constant words of reassurance and encouragement. And it sounds so much like a dad, or I think a grandpa, talking to the little ones that he has such high hopes for and such a wonderful view. Because everybody knows, Andy, our grandkids are up here, right? Kids, okay, we had our moments. But grandkids, yes, they're up here. That's why I can't help but think he's talking to grandkids in the faith. And he says, I want you to be bold when Jesus returns. I want you to know you've moved from death to life. That constant reassuring, that constant uplifting. But he's got more to say about love. And so he circles back to it more than once. Because he wants us to understand where love comes from. In this world of where it's I guess you could say, popular to deny that God exists. It's popular to take the traditional views of how man started out. And so we deal with evolution, and we deal with some of these other philosophies. And they can explain so much by using biology and science and these types of things. But you get to this one experience, and you've got a little trouble with it. How do you explain love? Now, dogs show affection, don't they? Is that anything like human love? Say no. Help me out. Okay. I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page. How do you explain love? In the animal kingdom, it has to do with various DNA traits and activities of this part of the laws of nature and these types of things. And obviously, I'm not a biologist, so we're good with that. You understand that? Human love is just one of those things that's really hard to explain how it gets here. When Paul teaches about love, we go automatically to 1 Corinthians 13, and he's got this expose. He talks about the characteristic traits that identify agape. And he approaches it from, I guess you could say, more of a almost a scientific or grammatical approach. And we know 1 Corinthians 13 is the chapter on love. John says, I want you to look at this differently. I want you to see love based on where it begins. Where does love originate? Where does it, this is not good grammar, but where does it come from? How does it exist in the human experience? And for John, there is no question. He'll say it twice. Chapter 4, verse 8, chapter 4, verse 16, that three-word expression we've used already in this study, God is love. And for John, just like God is light, and he emanates light, and he fills creation. Light comes into existence because it originates and emanates from him. And life comes into existence and fills creation because it emanates from him. In the same sense, John says, love does the same thing. And because agape is an active love, because agape is only really agape when it's being expressed, when it's in action. I mentioned that we could almost view love as energy. Now, this is one of those really simplistic illustrations. So, bear with me, okay? Out at Glen Rose, Comanche Peak, right? Nuclear reactor power plant. Okay, here's what I want to try and plant in our brains. A couple of images. One, God as this nuclear power plant of love energy. He is the originator. He is the source. He is the one from whom all true agape flows. And because he is, and because he is willing to do so, he allows that love energy to flow out of himself and into his creation. And so his creation is allowed and enabled to experience the energy of agape, love in action. And so we can talk about God as that power plant that produces all of the genuine agape love that we can experience or know. But John has a little more to say about that. Because it's not just that he's the power plant, he's also the instigator. So now we're going to change to another simplistic illustration. Lightning. God is not only the source of agape. John says God is the original cause. He's the instigator. He's the one that chooses by his actions to put love into his creation. And so you've got glimpses of it as you go back through the Old Testament. You've got the ark and Noah. There's a glimpse of God's love. You've got the promise of the seed of woman. There's a glimpse of God's love. But you go through at least 4,000 years of human history, and where does that love become expressly visible? John 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world, he gave, right? God is that lightning that strikes his creation with that energy of love, that agape in action. And he plants that into creation so that creation can know at the fullest expression this amazing agape of God. 1 John has a verse like that. 1 John 3:16. He says, "By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. We also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren." It's that original cause, that reason that it exists and that it exists in our experience. And 5 times in this letter, John reserves an expression that he'll say, the love of God. Because everything we are, everything we know, everything we experience, everything we've received hinges on that love. Now, love of God could mean our love for God, or it could mean God's love for us. The context makes clear every time he uses it. He's talking about God's love for us. And all of his argument is based on our knowledge of and experience of that love. The love that he willingly, by his own choice, expresses on all of us. John wants us to know and understand, we could say, the backstory of love, so that we're better equipped to move forward with the rest of the message. And this is the reason I like thinking of agape as a type of energy. Eros can be that kind of love if you're feeling it for your spouse. The feeling of eros is a part of it being real. Philadelphia, philos, phileo, that can be in some sense real when you're feeling affection for a companion or a friend. Agape cannot be agape if it's just felt. Agape has to be action. It has to be visible. And if there's one message John weaves into almost the entirety of his letter, it's that essential message. Agape means action. Agape is only real when it's energy. When you leave your house, now I know I'm the only one married to a thermostat Nazi, right? And she's watching on video, so I'm in trouble already. But you know what I'm talking about. You don't move that thing down 1 degree because your mate doesn't want us to be paying any extra electricity. So we try and leave it where it belongs. And when you leave a room, you always have to turn off the lights. And if you leave the house, like most of us have this morning, you probably turned off the lights, you probably turned off maybe the ceiling fans, the television, the stereo, your microwave isn't running, your vacuum cleaner isn't running. How would somebody who walked into your house right now know that your power is still on? They'd know by the things we don't turn off, right? You could see the clocks. And if you've got a 6-year-old, they're all set to the right time. The one on the wall and the one on the VCR and the one on the microwave. You can hear your refrigerator or your freezer humming or your central air unit kicking on. Those types of things. That's how they would know that the energy, that the electricity is still on at your house. But it's not being realized when something isn't running, when something isn't turned on. For John, agape is not real if it doesn't show. Do look at these verses with me. 1 John chapter 3, verse 10. He says, "In this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother." He says, you know what? When love isn't visible, when it's not active, we're denying our identity, or we're deceiving ourselves about our identity. Chapter 3, verse 17. Jump down a little bit further. He says, "Whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, shuts up his heart from him. How does the love of God abide in him?" He says, when love's not visibly in action, there's this agape shaped hole in our heart that is supposed to be filled by that love, but we're not allowing it. Chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. He who says he's in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there's no cause for stumbling in him. But he who hates his brother is in darkness, walks in darkness, does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eye. Not loving puts us in a state of darkness and not knowing where we're going. Chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. When we choose to put that love in the wrong place, we put ourselves in eternal peril. For John, when love isn't visible, when it's not active and doing and expressing itself in discernible ways, it's not real love, and we move from being in a position of security and assurance to a position of uncertainty and perhaps peril. You just can't have one without the other. Some messages are kind of tough to deliver. Maybe it's because the topic is one of those sensitive, offensive kind of topics. Or maybe it's a tough message to deliver because you're talking to a hostile audience. Think of Paul preaching to the Sanhedrin, or just about any sermon Jeremiah ever preached. I love preaching about love with this family because I know the family we are. A family that's shown itself for decades now, committed to visible, active, committed love through a whole spectrum of situations. The message isn't hard to deliver, except for the part that we've got to remember. Agape is not one of those targets that we shoot at, we hit it the first time, and then we say, okay, we're done. We're never going to reach that point. Agape is supposed to be that constant target that we're steadily striving to draw closer and closer to. And I'm not talking about love based on the way the world loves. I'm talking about the true agape, which is God's nature. That has to be something that we strive at day in, day out, week in, week out. Always looking, always reaching, trying to become more and more like Jesus. The Philippian church that Paul writes is a church that his letter reveals to be one that is really devoted and engaged in loving one another and living their faith in just a wonderful example for those to follow. And yet even the Philippian church, Paul will say, keep working, keep growing, keep going, keep moving forward. That's our goal. Right now we've got some challenges. It's challenging to love at a distance. Anybody else feel that frustration? It's challenging to love in action in the midst of a period, Russ, where things are going back up. It's tough to show. Tougher. And yet our goal's always supposed to be striving to show it a little better tomorrow than I did yesterday. And a little better next week. And that's critical within the family, and it's critical to allow it to overflow the cup. I was talking to a person who spent several years in the food service industry. Now, what they told me, I'm going to work from an assumption that I'm going to take them at face value. But what they told me was that it was fairly common among the servers this person knew that Sunday lunch was their least favorite time to work. said, really, why? I thought, well, maybe because you want to be at church. He said, no. He said, those Christians get out of church and they come into the restaurant, and many of them are the most difficult people we wait on all week. And I thought, no, that can't be right. And so I asked some others that I knew, and they backed it up. See, the world watches us. They want to know that when we listen to God urge us to choose the way of agape, they want to know that it's not just something we do when we're gathered together here, when we're having teen retreats or fellowship meals or maybe life groups. The world needs to know that agape is a way of life that we're going to take out in every way we can into the world we enter. We leave here, we move into the mission field. We go deal at a rehab center with the folks that are causing us pain, bending our knees, or whatever they're doing. We deal with the IRS on the telephone. Oh, my stars. The world wants to know if we're serious about what we claim. I want them to see that. Let's keep working. Let's keep striving. Let's make sure that we show this world the love of God. If you're not His this morning, I want you to come. Let's stand.